for having us here today and for listening to what we all have to say. It definitely will be a combined effort to shift the direction that we're moving in right now. I'm a therapist. I'm in private practice in Kennett Square. I'm in Kennett Square because I'm also raising a family and I have 2 teenagers, so it's a good place for me to set up shop and raise my boys in a healthy environment. I'm part of a club that most of us don't want to be a part of, and that is that I received a phone call, I think it'll be 11 years in November, where I was married at the time, and I got the, "Hello, Mrs. Tyson, this is so-and-so officer from so-and-so police department." I had just moved back to Pennsylvania. I was born and raised here, but I married and moved out of state to New England, and I had just moved home. My children were toddlers, and I wanted to be closer to family. My husband at the time was out that night, and I had literally just tucked my 2 boys in. They're 16 months apart, so they were on either side of me, and the phone rang, and I answered it. And our family best friend, the best man in our wedding, and the first person to come and see me the day that both of my boys were born, had overdosed and died, and he was found in my house in New England. He was, at the time, clean and sober. He had been through recovery twice and had that thought that said, "You know what, it's been a while, it's okay, I'm gonna go and get a bag and go home." And he was in my home for 3 days before anybody found him. So that set a real hard knife kind of into the trajectory that I was on, raising 2 kids, and especially to my husband at the time. That was his very best friend. We lost another friend subsequently a few months later to a suicide. He was a veteran who was also struggling with substance use issues, non-opioid, but again, couldn't beat it and committed suicide. So for us, it was just a trauma on top of a trauma. Fast forward, here I am today as a therapist, and went through a graduate program in the city of Philadelphia at Philadelphia University, which I think will soon be Thomas Jefferson. They're merging. And we have in the city one of the few clinical programs in the country that looks at the clinical approach through the lens of trauma, where no other clinical program in the country is 100% trauma focused. So I have to say I feel incredibly honored to be here today and to represent what is a growing and quickly burgeoning population of clinicians in the city of Philadelphia who are armed with the most cutting edge research, information, and treatment protocol for what we're addressing here today. I'm also the granddaughter of a diplomat and the daughter of an Air Force colonel who served the state of Pennsylvania for the war on drugs. And if my dad's listening, I can't remember if it was the 80s or the 90s, so sorry, Dad, but I was little. And he would assist Bob Casey in the Pennsylvania approach to how do we deal with what's happening with drug use and distribution in the state. I also speak publicly. This morning I feel a little bit more nervous than I typically do presenting. I think perhaps because we're talking about something that hits very close to home, but I also recognize that when I speak publicly, something that I'm facing is scrutiny. And I'm sure you as a panel of representatives can definitely understand what that feels like. One misstep, one wrong word, and your email boxes blow up and the phones start ringing. And especially in the last 6 months, I imagine you've been quite busy. So what does that feel like? You're well-intended. You came into this position because you want to do good, and you want to serve the law and the American people, just as my father did and my grandfather did, but sometimes we make mistakes. And when we make a mistake, sometimes we feel ashamed, we feel guilty, we feel embarrassment, and that's an uncomfortable feeling. In the life of a recovering person, I don't like to use the word addict, I like to use the word recovering person, that shame and that guilt and that embarrassment is what you and I experience relatively mildly, hopefully, exponentially magnified, and it is what they experience everywhere they go, and they cannot get away from it. And they can't get away from it because we have a cultural stigma that is pervasive in the addiction field, and we have got to change the dialogue. So one of the questions that was asked earlier today was, how does this work in the brain? And I want to take a couple of minutes to explain to you the biology of what happens with addiction, because what I'm here to tell you today is that we cannot find a gene, at least today. We have not been able to detect any DNA that delivers information to us in the field of recovery that addiction is a genetic malfunction and that we are somehow born addicts. It's not the case. We did find a gene that lets us know that certain individuals are more susceptible to how the body misprocesses alcohol, but in terms of opiates, we have not been able to find that. So I'm here to dispel addiction as a disease and instead teach you more about how it works on a developmental level, if you will. So I'm going to invite everybody in the audience to do this if you want to, but I'm going to have you reference your hand as the human brain. The brain is divided into three major structures. So your wrist would represent what your brain stem is, which is for automatic function. Your thumb folded into your hand will represent what we call the limbic system, which is your stress response, which also interacts when you respond to stress with the hindbrain. And this is also where emotions take place. So negative emotions like fear and anger and grief, and also pleasure and reward. And then your fingers folded over your thumb will represent your cortex, which is where we as humans, this is the most human part of our brain, is responsible for self-regulation, self-identification, emotional control, and interaction and understanding of who you are as an individual with your environment. Something to know and understand about the brain is that when you engage in a stress response, all of this cortical structure shuts off, and basically we kind of flip our lid and that limbic structure takes over. And what happens is that stress response is almost like a muscle. And the more it engages, the more limbically ready we are, and the more quick we are to engage with stress than we are to engage with self-control, because when any time that stress response kicks in, that cortex goes offline and doesn't get the exercise, if that makes sense. The other thing that happens back here in this limbic system is that stress response hijacks part of the brain called your nucleus accumbens, which is responsible for dopamine production, which is what you experience when you're falling in love or having a really great day. Like that high of the sunroof is open and my favorite song is on and it's a sunny day and I just feel awesome for no real explanation. That's dopamine. But the more that we engage with stress, the more that nucleus accumbens, that dopamine process is hijacked, and over time it quiets down. This is also where motivation takes place. So what does this mean for somebody who is engaging in addiction? It means that the muscle in the brain that's responsible for feelings of positivity and a positive sense of self and positive experiences with and around the environment is not readily available, and it's very, very difficult to access over time. In walks an opiate, which delivers that chemical to the body that helps us feel good, and all of a sudden the brain says, oh yeah, I want that. And the next thing you know, we're slowly working our way into a developmental cycle of negativity and engagement with these drugs. The reason we're seeing adolescents and individuals in their early 20s most susceptible to these drugs, and one thing that we're learning in the field, is that the brain isn't fully developed until we're in our mid-20s and into our late 20s. So we're taking tissue that is really susceptible. The brain is plastic, so that plasticity is very susceptible to maladaptive features like addiction, because when we look at humans, the way that we're designed is, even though that stress response is so strong, we're designed to connect. So if we're not experiencing meaningful connection day to day, what's the point, right? So the brain is going to keep looking for that connection, and if it's coming in the form of liquid love, it's easy, it's quick, and that person knows they're going to get it because maybe they're not getting that connection at home. Maybe they're not getting that connection at school. Maybe they're not getting that connection in their community. So the drive to connect is that much stronger, and the drugs, again, will win out. This is not a disease. This is not a disease. This is a maladaptive process that has a lot to do with how we are structured right now culturally. So moving away from the individual, I want to address the system. 95% of our treatment dollars in healthcare are post-diagnostic. 18% of our GDP is driven in healthcare dollars, and 5% goes to the military. So 18%, again, is for healthcare, and 95% of those healthcare dollars are spent post-diagnostically. Excuse me. So what does that mean? That means that, oops, that means I hit the wrong button. That means that we're building mops, and we're not fixing the plumbing. So we just spent the first 2.5 hours here this morning talking about mops, naloxone. Well, I don't know about you, but the other day one of my gutters broke and the water puddled up into my little, eyelash window, and it spilled down into the wall while I was away for the day and came home to a puddle in my basement. Nothing catastrophic, but it was definitely frustrating, and I had to clean it up. So what did I do? Did I go buy another mop? I looked at how to repair the gutter. We are not doing that in this country. We're great mop builders. I worked in a mop factory. I spent 2 years of my life in an inpatient institution treating 95% of my patients recovering from opiate addiction, and when an alcoholic walked in the room, it was like a unicorn came in. I have parents and families calling me looking for treatment for their relapsed family member, and I'm told over and over again, I'm sorry, we won't have a bed for this individual for 5 to 6 weeks. All the time. I had a suicide ideation call on Sunday night, and of 20 psychiatric hospitals in 3 states, this individual could not get treatment. They were left in an emergency room without a psychiatrist and overlooked by a charge nurse. And this is in Chester County, where we have a lot available to us resource-wise. I'm just going to close. I think we've covered a lot today, so I feel like I might start going into repeat, and I appreciate your time. But I can tell you that I have seen doctors, nurses, lawyers, far too many veterans in eye care to even count at this point. Children, grandchildren, grandparents, nieces, nephews, black, white, tall, short, gay, straight, trans, you name it. It's everywhere and it's everyone. It hit my family. I hope it doesn't hit yours, but the chances are pretty good. We can talk about data, we can collect more data, we can data, but I'm telling you right now, when you reconvene for your next meeting, the numbers will have gone up. I'll close by saying that Albert Einstein says that insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. And he also said, silence your cell phone. He also said, if you spend your whole life teaching a fish how to climb a tree, that fish will believe he is stupid. So I think we really need to redirect the dialogue. I appreciate law enforcement, I appreciate the justice system, but clearly there are many, many issues that need to be addressed, so thank you.